Let me tell you why I believe that theological seminaries and divinity schools should rewrite their history of religion, especially the early church and how it relates to the doctrine of the Trinity. As many of you know, I am the author of Philo's Trinity, and I am the first to state and to tell the whole world that the Trinity doctrine that is known today by many denominations and is the foundation of the Roman Catholic Church. Well, this Trinity was first developed by Philo of Alexandria. I'm not saying yet that he just influenced people or some of his ideas caught on with the apostolic and ante-Nicene fathers. No, I'm saying that he really wrote about the Trinity doctrine, and since he used an allegorical interpretation, he used the scriptures, the Old Testament scriptures, to give the Trinity a biblical basis. But again, he did this using an allegorical interpretation. I believe that, religious universities should rewrite their history because it currently isn't accurate at all. Some of their philosophers or their professors, which are philosophers, state that the early church was Trinitarian. And that is the most ignorant statement that you can make, showing the world that you don't know what you're talking about. Because anyone who examines the New Testament will quickly see that this is not true. Now, like I said previously, I'm the author of Philo's Trinity, and I'm the first one to teach that Philo gave us the Trinity, hook, line, and sinker. He gave us the persons, the three persons of the Trinity. He gave us Genesis 1:26, let us make man in our image, and he taught that this was God speaking to two other creators. And he gave us the Greek logos, which Philo made it into a second God. The word and wisdom together, he put them together so he could find Bible for it. And of course, he allegorized to make the word, which is spoken, he made it into a divine being, a messenger and a second God. And yes, he even called him the Son of God. And this is why the early church fathers, the apostolic and ante-Nicene fathers, this is why they found a connection between Philo's teachings and their own ideas. And so this is what really happened. But I want the universities to understand that there's a lot of proof, and there are a lot of people that wrote about Philo of Alexandria. Maybe they didn't make the connection that I made, but they still came very close. I'm going to read to you some of these sources that have been growing every year as I keep teaching on Philo's Trinity. Are you ready for this? Let's begin. Of course, there is the actual writings of Philo of Alexandria, the works of Philo, that you can look at, where he speaks about the three persons and the logos that became the logos of Christology. And you can look also at the writings of the apostolic and ante-Nicene fathers. Now, this is a 10-volume set, and it's very difficult to read. But if you really want to confirm things and prove things, you have to go through them. Then we have, and some of the fathers that name Philo by name were Justin Martyr and Origen. And a certain author says that Clement of Alexandria cited Philo 300 times. And that author also said that Ambrose cited Philo 600 times. So this is how strong the influence that Philo had on the 2nd century Greek church fathers, which were philosophers. Then we have an awesome teaching in Eusebius, who was the best known historian of his day, and some people still consider him the best religious historian. But Eusebius mentions Philo by name, and even writes down all the works of Philo, which were many, in his book, Ecclesiastical History. And he talked about Philo as coming before the apostles and as being a tremendous influence on the apostles, to the point that he went to Rome and met Peter and spoke with Peter. Wow. One of the sources that I really was blessed to find that commented on Philo was Alfred Edersheim and his life and times of Jesus the Messiah. That book is incredible because it shows you that there is the logos, the pagan logos of the Greek world, the pagan logos of Philo, which is the same thing, and then the logos of the scriptures, which is totally different than the logos of Philo. But yet men were deceived into bringing Philo's logos into the church and teaching that the logos was the second God, second person, the Son of God, Jesus Christ, a pre-existent Christ. Then we have the History of Christian Doctrines by Louis Berkhof, where he mentions that Philo did have a connection with the early church fathers. And then we have one of my favorite books is Philo in Early Christian Literature by David Runia. And this is one of my favorite works because David Runia did the work of tracing Philo's influence and ideas throughout the early church and leading to Alexandria, and from Alexandria leading into the Roman world. The Eastern and Western, it doesn't matter. Its influence was all over. And of course, very powerful. Now, I also found this book, From Philo to Origen, by Robert Birchman, where he also mentions the influence of Philo. And then we have, surprisingly, of all sources, I found the New Advent Catholic Encyclopedia, where they say, when they speak about the Logos, that from no one else could they learn the Logos than from Philo of Alexandria. So this is coming from the horse's mouth. They are admitting this very thing. Then you have The Origins of Christianity and the Bible by Andrew B. Benson. He dedicates a couple of pages to Philo of Alexandria and all the influence that he made. And of course, this man even points to Philo as being the one who developed the first to develop Christian theology. Because the early church fathers, they took Philo's ideas and ran with them. Powerful. Then we have the Holy Trinity, which is a more modern book by Robert Leatham. And he talks about the Logos Christology. And again, like all my sources, they mention that it was Philo's Logos who became the Logos of Christianity. And when they say Christianity, they really mean the Roman Catholic Church. Because there were Christians during the 2nd century, 3rd century, 4th century, who were not Catholic. And they did not believe in the Logos. There's plenty of proof for this. Wow. And then now we turn over to some of the videos on YouTube. And one of the first videos that I found that really talks about Philo was the video by William Chalfont, who was UPC minister, was called upon to do research and presented in a symposium. And he had some very awesome information. The only thing is that the ministers and pastors who were there were overwhelmed with his research. And so they started attacking him left and right. And that research did not get developed further. And no one ran with the ball. No one took up the ball and helped to continue. But Chalfont did say that he believed that from Alexandria is where the Trinity came from, and it influenced the Christian world. Wow. Then a tremendous video by Dr. William Lane Craig, who is a PhD in philosophy. And so he talks about, when he speaks about the history of the Trinity, he says that the early Greek fathers, and he mentions them by name, they were so taken up with Philo's logos that they applied it to John 1:1. Wow. Then you have Dr. Harold Edridge and Dr. David Bartlett from another university, and they talk about how Philo influenced the apostles. Now, that is not true, but this is what these men believed, and this is how they justified the logos of Philo and the Trinity, thinking there is nothing wrong with philosophy being part of the Bible or of the church. And of course, the apostles plainly taught against philosophy. So these men, they make reference to John 1:1, and that John the Apostle took his idea from Philo of Alexandria, the idea of the Logos. In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So they're thinking Philo, in the beginning was a pre-existent Christ, and that pre-existent Christ was with God, and that pre-existent Christ was God. The problem with that interpretation is that they're teaching two gods. And Trinitarians claim that they're monotheists and that they believe in only one God. So their interpretation of John 1:1 is totally wrong. Then we have a video that I stumbled upon, was the video by Dr. Robert Price. Now, Dr. Robert Price, I don't believe he goes along with Christianity as it is. But he comments and he says that Philo didn't have, he provided the roadmap to get to the Trinity. And then one of my latest finds was Dr. Ramelli. This lady is awesome, and she has done her homework. And she, in the video that I found of her, she's explaining how Philo is one of the main inspirers of patristic exegesis. In other words, Philo influenced the theology of the early church fathers, and there is evidence that they even took up his allegorical interpretation. She says that they were so taken by Philo that they imitated the ideas of Philo. They took him and they used them. Wow. And the last resource is Philo's Trinity, which is the book that I wrote, because all the sources I mentioned to you, they all talk about Philo's influence through the Logos, or Philo's allegorical interpretation, or this and that about Philo. But none of these sources, and I said this at the beginning, none of these sources point to where Philo does teach a Trinity. A Trinity that is so, it can be compared to the modern Trinity of today, and it will not skip a beat. This is the truth. That's why I believe Philo's Trinity is a very important book. But putting it with all these sources, and I have more sources, but for the sake of time, I gave you some of the ones that I liked. The universities need to look at all this information and all these people talking about Philo, and they need to rewrite history, and they need to include Philo in the development of the Trinity. If they don't want to say what I'm saying, well, it's up to them. But if they don't want to quote Philo, they should, because Philo does talk about the three persons. And Genesis 1:26, let us make man in our image. And he does mention the Logos as being a second God and the Son of God. And he even talks about other things that can be related to this study. So I would appeal to all theological seminaries and divinity schools to go back and research and then rewrite their history of the early church and the development of the Trinity doctrine. That way they can be accurate and not be saying things that are so old, information that is so outdated, it's ridiculous. Please, for the sake of clarity and to help many people who are searching, to help them find the truth of the Trinity doctrine, and Philo, the one who first gave us the Trinity using Scripture.